The year 2387 marked the end of everything humans had ever known. Earth was dying and there was no way to save it. The once blue planet had turned into a wasteland where nothing could grow anymore. The air was poison, the water was gone, and the sun itself was getting weaker each day. People were dying everywhere, and the few who remained alive knew they only had months left. That's when the aliens came with their offer. The Galactic Council, made up of 12 different alien species, had been watching Earth for decades. They saw what was happening and decided to help, but not in the way humans had hoped. Instead of saving Earth, they offered to take the survivors away to special worlds where humans could live under their protection and care. Captain Lee Mina stood on the bridge of the massive colony ship called New Hope, looking at the reports coming in from around the world. Only 50,000 humans were left alive out of the billions who once lived on Earth. These survivors were now packed into 10 large ships, ready to leave their home planet forever. Lee Mina was chosen to lead this final journey because she was one of the few military officers who understood both human nature and alien technology. The alien ships that surrounded the human fleet were incredible to see. The Vorthak ships looked like floating crystals that sparkled in the darkness of space. These aliens were tall and thin, made of what looked like living glass. They spoke in musical tones and seemed to think very slowly about everything. The Mindari vessels were smooth and round, glowing with soft purple light. The Mindari themselves were the most disturbing because they could read minds and often spoke to humans without opening their mouths. The Zephyrian ships were the largest, covered in strange symbols that moved and changed constantly. The Zephyrians looked almost like humans, but with skin that changed colors based on their moods. All three alien species treated humans the same way people might treat interesting pets. They would stand around watching humans eat, sleep, and talk to each other, taking notes and making comments about human behavior. The Vorthak were fascinated by human emotions, especially anger and sadness, which they didn't understand. The Mindari kept trying to organize human thoughts, getting frustrated when human minds jumped from topic to topic randomly. The Zephyrians were most interested in human creativity, but they thought human art and music were primitive and simple. What the aliens didn't know was that down in the deepest parts of the colony ships, away from their watching eyes, something amazing was happening. Dr. Park Junho had been working on secret projects for years before Earth started dying. He was a brilliant scientist who studied consciousness and genetics, trying to understand what made humans special compared to other species they had met. Dr. Park had gathered a small team of volunteers who were willing to try dangerous experiments. They worked in hidden laboratories built inside the walls of the ships, using equipment they had secretly brought from Earth. The aliens had scanned the ships before departure, but missed these hidden rooms because they were shielded with technology the aliens had never seen before. The experiments Dr. Park was doing involved something called quantum consciousness transfer. This meant trying to move a person's mind and personality from their physical body into pure energy. He had also been working on genetic modification, changing human DNA to make it stronger and more adaptable. Most scientists thought these ideas were impossible, but Dr. Park had made some surprising discoveries. During the long journey to the Kepler system, Dr. Park and his team worked day and night. They had volunteers from among the survivors, people who knew they might die from the experiments but wanted to try anyway because they had nothing left to lose. Slowly, they began to see results that even Dr. Park couldn't believe. As the human ships moved farther away from Earth, the alien escorts continued their studies. They wrote reports about human behavior, discussing how humans were too emotional to make good decisions and too weak to survive in the galaxy without help. They planned to put humans in comfortable homes on the new planet, give them food and entertainment, and study them like animals in a zoo. The irony was incredible. While the aliens were making plans to keep humans as protected specimens, the humans were already becoming something the aliens couldn't imagine. The experiments in the hidden laboratories were succeeding beyond anyone's dreams, and the survivors were beginning a transformation that would change everything. As Earth's sun became just another tiny star in the distance, the aliens congratulated themselves on saving an interesting but limited species. They had no idea they were actually escorting the future guardians of the entire galaxy. 23 years had passed since the humans settled on Kepler 442b, and everything seemed to be going exactly as the Galactic Council had planned. The dear planet was perfect for human life, with clean air, fresh water, and fertile soil. The aliens had built comfortable cities for the survivors, complete with schools, hospitals, and entertainment centers. Regular reports came in showing that humans were adapting well to their new home under alien protection. Commander Kim Tae-hyun of the Council Monitoring Fleet had visited the human settlements many times over the years. He was a Mindari officer who had always been curious about human behavior. Unlike many of his fellow aliens, he actually liked humans and enjoyed watching them build their new lives. He had seen human children being born on the new planet, watched them grow up, and observed how they learned to live alongside their alien caretakers. The settlement check that day started like any other routine inspection. Commander Kim's ship approached the main human city of New Eden, expecting to see the usual signs of life. There should have been people walking in the streets, children playing in the parks, and workers tending to the farms outside the city. The communication channels should have been full of human chatter and daily reports. Instead, there was complete silence. At first, Commander Kim thought there might be a technical problem with their equipment. He ordered his crew to run full diagnostics on all their sensors and communication systems. Everything was working perfectly, but they were picking up no signs of human activity anywhere on the planet. No heat signatures from human bodies, no electrical activity from their homes and buildings, no movement of any kind. The landing party that went down to investigate found something that made no sense at all. The human cities were completely intact but completely empty. Houses still had furniture, clothing hanging in closets, and food on kitchen tables. Some meals looked like they had been abandoned in the middle of being eaten. Children's toys were scattered in playrooms, books were left open on desks, and personal belongings were everywhere. But there were no humans anywhere. The search teams went through every building, every room, every possible hiding place. They checked underground tunnels, storage areas, and even the sewage systems. They expanded their search to cover the entire continent, then the whole planet. 50,000 people had simply disappeared without leaving any trace of where they had gone or what had happened to them. What made it even more mysterious was that all the human technology was still there, but it wasn't working anymore. Their computers wouldn't turn on, their vehicles wouldn't start, and even simple electronic devices were completely dead. It was as if every piece of human-made technology had been drained of power at exactly the same moment. The only clue left behind was discovered by accident when one of the search team members tripped and fell near the center of New Eden. As he got up, he noticed strange markings on the ground that hadn't been there during previous visits. When they cleared away the dirt and vegetation, they found words carved deep into the solid rock beneath the city. The message was written in 17 different alien languages, including Mindari, Vorthak, Zephyrian, and 14 others from across the galaxy. Every translation said exactly the same thing. We have become what we needed to become. Commander Kim stared at those words for hours, trying to understand what they could possibly mean. How had humans learned to write in alien languages they had never been taught? How had they carved words so deep into solid rock without any tools that could do such work? And most importantly, what did they mean by becoming what they needed to become? The Council's best scientists and investigators were called in to study the mystery. They brought the most advanced scanning equipment in the galaxy, devices that could detect the smallest traces of biological matter or energy signatures. They analyzed every molecule of air, every grain of soil, and every drop of water on the planet. The results were impossible to believe. The scanners found absolutely no evidence that humans had ever left the planet. There were no traces of spacecraft, launches, no energy signatures from transportation technology, and no signs that any ships had ever visited the system except for the Council's own vessels. According to every scientific instrument they had, 50,000 humans had simply stopped existing. Some investigators suggested that the humans might have built secret underground cities or found ways to hide from alien sensors. Search teams spent months exploring every cave, valley, and underwater area on the planet. They found nothing except empty settlements and that mysterious message carved in stone. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings to discuss what had happened. Some members thought it might be evidence of a new alien species with technology beyond their understanding. Others worried that humans had somehow developed dangerous abilities that made them a threat. A few suggested that the humans might have committed mass suicide, though there were no bodies or evidence to support that theory. After 2 years of investigation, the Council officially declared humanity extinct. They sealed off the Kepler system and marked it as a memorial to a lost species. The case files were classified, and most aliens were told that humans had died from a plague that affected only their species. But the mystery never went away. The human vanishing became the most studied unsolved case in galactic history, whispered about in universities and research centers across the galaxy. 75 years passed after the humans vanished, and something incredible began happening across the galaxy. Wars that had raged for centuries suddenly stopped. Diseases that had killed millions of people were mysteriously cured overnight. Criminal organizations that had terrorized entire star systems simply disappeared without a trace. At first, most aliens thought this was just good luck, or better, government policies, but the pattern was too strange to ignore. The first major incident happened during what should have been the bloodiest conflict in galactic history. The Korvaxi Empire and the Tellurian Federation had been building up their military forces for decades, preparing for a war that would involve billions of soldiers and devastate dozens of worlds. Their fleets were positioned at the border, weapons, charged and ready to fire. Both sides had issued final ultimatums, and the first shots were about to be fired. Then something impossible happened. Every single weapon system on both fleets simply stopped working. Not just the big guns on the warships, but every laser pistol, every missile, every piece of military equipment suddenly became useless. The computers controlling the weapons showed error messages that made no sense, displaying text in languages that didn't exist in any database. Within hours, both military commanders received identical messages on their personal communication devices, written in their own languages, explaining exactly what would happen if the war continued. The messages showed detailed predictions of casualty numbers, economic collapse, and social devastation that were so accurate and terrifying that both sides immediately agreed to peace talks. Similar events started happening everywhere. The plague that was killing the crystal beings on Xerion Prime was suddenly cured when medical centers across the planet received anonymous data packets containing the complete genetic sequence of a cure that shouldn't have been possible to develop for another century. The information came from nowhere, appeared in computer systems that weren't connected to any network, and worked perfectly when doctors tried it. Space pirates who had been raiding merchant ships for decades began disappearing. In the strangest ways, Captain Vex Creighton, the most feared pirate in 3 sectors, was attacking a defenseless cargo ship when his entire crew simply vanished during the middle of the raid. Security cameras showed his pirates walking around one moment, then empty, corridors the next. Vex himself was found floating in space near his ship 3 days later, alive but completely changed. He surrendered to the authorities and spent the rest of his life working to help the people he had once robbed, claiming that invisible beings had shown him the pain he had caused to thousands of families. Traders and merchant pilots started reporting ghost ships that appeared on their sensors but couldn't be seen with the naked eye. These mysterious vessels would show up near ships in distress, somehow fix whatever problems they were having, then disappear again. Captain Lee Bora, who ran cargo routes between the outer colonies, had her ship's engine fail in deep space where no rescue was possible. Her sensors detected a large ship approaching, but when she looked out the windows, she saw nothing but empty space. Suddenly, her engines started working again. Her damaged life support systems repaired themselves, and she found her cargo hold filled with emergency supplies she definitely hadn't been carrying before. Even more mysterious were the technological gifts that primitive worlds began receiving. Planets that had barely discovered electricity would wake up to find advanced medical equipment, clean energy generators, and communication systems that had simply appeared overnight in their major cities. These devices came with detailed instruction manuals written in the local languages, explaining how to use and maintain them. The technology was always exactly what each world needed most and was designed to integrate perfectly with their existing society without causing disruption. But perhaps the strangest phenomena were the dreams that leaders across the galaxy began experiencing. Presidents, kings, corporate executives, and military commanders from hundreds of different species reported having identical, vivid dreams that showed them the exact consequences of their planned actions. A Zephyrian general planning to invade a neighboring system would dream of seeing his own soldiers dying in battle, the families they left behind, and the decades of suffering his war would cause. A corporate leader planning to dump toxic waste on an uninhabited planet would dream of watching that poison spread to nearby worlds and kill millions of innocent people. These weren't ordinary dreams. They were incredibly detailed visions that showed mathematical calculations, scientific data, and social patterns that the dreamers couldn't have known on their own. Most disturbing of all, when leaders ignored these warning dreams and went ahead with their plans anyway, the exact events from their dreams would start happening in real life, forcing them to change course quickly to avoid disaster. Dr. Yoon So-hee was the Galactic Council's top investigator, assigned to study these mysterious events and find explanations. She spent years analyzing data, interviewing witnesses, and investigating every incident. Her research files grew to contain thousands of cases, but she could never find concrete proof of what was causing them. Every scientific test came back negative. Every investigation led to dead ends, and every witness could only describe feeling watched by invisible presences. Despite the lack of hard evidence, rumors began spreading throughout the galaxy about mysterious guardians who protected civilization from the shadows. Some called them angels, others thought they were advanced artificial intelligences, and a few suggested they might be the spirits of extinct species seeking redemption. Whatever they were, most aliens agreed that these invisible watchers were keeping the galaxy safe from itself, preventing wars and disasters before they could begin. The Drakmor Empire had grown tired of the galaxy's peaceful ways. For 75 years they had watched as conflicts ended mysteriously, and wars were prevented by invisible forces. While other species celebrated this era of peace, the Drakmor saw it as weakness. They were a warrior culture that believed strength came from conquest, and they had been building their military in secret, preparing for the day they would restore what they called the natural order of the galaxy. The ethereal collective became their first target. These peaceful beings were perfect victims in the Drakmor's eyes, advanced enough to be worth conquering, but too gentle to fight back effectively. The ethereals lived on floating cities that drifted through space, creating beautiful art and music, while studying the mysteries of the universe. They had no military, no weapons, and no desire for conflict. To the Drakmor, they represented everything that was wrong with the galaxy's current state. Admiral Choi Woo-jin commanded the largest Drakmor battle fleet ever assembled. He was a veteran warrior who had spent decades preparing for this moment, studying every mysterious incident that had prevented conflicts in recent years. His ships were shielded against electronic interference. His weapons were purely mechanical to avoid computer malfunctions, and his crew was trained to fight even if their technology failed completely. The attack began at dawn on the ethereal homeworld of Luminous. 300 Drakmor warships dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously, surrounding the peaceful floating cities. Admiral Choi expected the usual mysterious interventions that had stopped other conflicts, but he was prepared to fight through whatever tried to stop him. At first, everything went according to plan. The Drakmor ships opened fire on the ethereal cities, their weapons functioning perfectly. The beautiful crystalline structures that housed millions of peaceful beings began to crack and shatter under the assault. Ethereal civilians fled in panic, their cries for help broadcasting across all frequencies as their defenseless cities fell one by one. But then space itself began to rebel against the attackers. It started with small things. Weapon targeting systems began showing impossible readings, claiming that ethereal cities were simultaneously in multiple locations. Communication systems started receiving signals from sources that didn't exist, flooding the networks with data that made no sense. The Drakmor ships' artificial intelligence systems, which had been programmed for warfare, suddenly began questioning their orders and refusing to fire on civilian targets. Admiral Choi tried to maintain control as his fleet descended into chaos. Ships that should have been destroying ethereal cities instead found their weapons turning toward empty space. Engines that had worked perfectly for decades suddenly developed mysterious malfunctions that prevented the ships from moving closer to their targets. Most disturbing of all, the ship's computers began displaying messages in languages that weren't in any database, warning the crew about the consequences of their actions. Then the temperature inside every Drakmor ship began to drop rapidly, not the artificial cold of broken life support systems, but something deeper and more unsettling. The crew members felt it in their bones, a chill that seemed to reach into their souls. Emergency lighting flickered on and off in patterns that looked almost like a code, and the air itself seemed to thicken, making it harder to breathe. That's when they appeared. The first sighting came from the bridge of Admiral Choi's flagship. A junior officer pointed at the main view screen with a shaking hand, his voice barely a whisper as he reported what he saw. Floating in the space between the Drakmor fleet and the ethereal cities were beings unlike anything anyone had ever encountered. They looked like living light, constantly shifting between different forms and states of matter. Sometimes they appeared solid, like humans made of glowing crystal. Other times they became pure energy, crackling with power that made the space around them bend and twist. They could phase through solid objects as if they weren't there, then become dense enough to deflect laser fire with their bare hands. The beings moved through space without any visible means of propulsion, gliding between the massive warships, as if they weighed nothing at all. When they touched Drakmor technology, it responded to their will rather than its programming. Weapons that had been firing moments before simply shut down. Ships that had been advancing suddenly found themselves unable to move forward, but it was their voices that truly shocked everyone who heard them. When the beings spoke, they did so in the voices of every galactic species simultaneously. Drakmor heard their own language while ethereal listeners heard theirs, and the ship's computers recorded communications in hundreds of different tongues all at once. Yet beneath all these alien voices was something else, something that sent chills through everyone who recognized it. They were speaking in human languages that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for nearly a century. Admiral Choi stood frozen on his bridge as one of the beings appeared directly in front of him, passing through the ship's hull as if it were made of air. The entity's form shifted constantly, but for brief moments, he could see something almost human in its features. The being looked at him with eyes that held the wisdom of ages and the sadness of loss, then spoke in a voice that carried the authority of absolute truth. "We are the Ascended," the being said, its words echoing through every ship in the fleet, simultaneously. "We are the children of Earth, and you will cease this violence." The declaration sent shockwaves through the entire Drakmor fleet. Earth was a name from ancient history, the homeworld of a species that had vanished mysteriously decades ago. These beings were claiming to be those same humans, but transformed into something beyond physical existence. Admiral Choi felt his legs give out beneath him as the full weight of the revelation hit him. The invisible guardians who had been protecting the galaxy for 75 years weren't mysterious aliens or advanced artificial intelligences. They were humans, evolved beyond recognition, but still driven by the same protective instincts that had once made them defend their dying homeworld. Within minutes, every ship in the Drakmor fleet had surrendered, not because they were forced to, but because they finally understood what they were facing. The beings that had once been dismissed as weak and primitive had become the galaxy's immortal protectors, and they would not allow the peace they had worked so hard to maintain to be destroyed by anyone. Ambassador Thys had not slept properly in weeks since the Drakmor incident. As one of the oldest members of the Galactic Council, he had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, but nothing had prepared him for the revelation that humans still existed. More disturbing was the realization that these transformed beings had been silently protecting the galaxy for decades while everyone believed them extinct. Thys remembered the evacuation of Earth clearly. He had been a junior officer then, tasked with overseeing the loading of human refugees onto the colony ships. He recalled feeling a mixture of pity and condescension toward these emotional, short-lived creatures who seemed so helpless compared to the advanced alien species. The humans had appeared grateful for the rescue, but also strangely determined about something he couldn't understand at the time. Now, nearly a century later, Thais found himself in the unprecedented position of requesting a formal audience with beings that had once been under his protection. The irony was not lost on him that he was now the one who needed their help to understand what had happened to the galaxy. The meeting was arranged through methods that defied all understanding of physics and communication. Thais simply thought about wanting to speak with the Ascended, and within hours he received a response that appeared directly in his mind. The message was gentle but firm, inviting him to a location in deep space between star systems where they could talk without interference or observation. Thais arrived at the coordinates in his personal diplomatic vessel, accompanied only by a small crew who waited nervously in the ship while their ambassador ventured into the unknown. The location was empty space, billions of miles from the nearest star with nothing but cosmic dust and radiation filling the void. Then they appeared, and Thais felt his breath catch in his throat despite decades of diplomatic training. 3 beings materialized in the space directly in front of his ship, each one a marvel of transformed existence that challenged everything he thought he knew about life and consciousness. They were beautiful and terrible at the same time, shifting constantly between different states of being that his eyes could barely follow. The first being appeared as pure energy contained within a roughly humanoid shape, crackling with power that made the space around it glow with soft light. Sometimes it looked solid enough to touch. Other times it became transparent like a ghost, and occasionally it transformed into something that resembled living crystal that reflected stars from impossible angles. The second being was more stable in appearance but no less amazing. It maintained a form that was clearly based on human anatomy, but enlarged and perfected beyond anything nature had ever created. Its skin seemed to be made of flowing light that shifted through every color in the spectrum, and when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that touched the soul directly. The third being was the most recognizable and the most heartbreaking. Despite its transformation into something beyond physical existence, Thais could still see traces of the human woman he had once known. This was Captain Lee Mina, the leader who had guided the last survivors of Earth to their new home, now evolved into something that existed beyond the limitations of matter and energy. When Captain Lee Mina spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades spent watching over the galaxy, and the sadness of a species that had been forced to abandon everything they once were in order to become what the universe needed. "Ambassador Thais," she said, and despite all the changes in her form, her voice still carried the same determination he remembered from their first meeting. "You want to understand what happened to us and why we chose to become what we are now." Thais found his voice after several moments of stunned silence. "Your people were dying when we evacuated Earth. We gave you a chance to survive and preserve your culture. How did you become this?" The being that had once been Dr. Park Junho stepped forward, his transformed features shifting as he accessed memories from his previous existence. "The experiments I began on Earth continued during our journey and after our settlement. We discovered that consciousness is not tied to physical matter the way we once believed. Human awareness, emotion, and memory could exist independently of biological form. But why?" Thais asked, struggling to understand. "You had peaceful lives on your new world. You were safe, protected, free to build a new civilization. Why abandon your physical existence?" Captain Lee Mina's expression grew sad as she answered. "Because we realized that safety and comfort were not enough. For 23 years we lived as your protected specimens, grateful for survival but increasingly aware of the suffering that existed throughout the galaxy. Wars, diseases, slavery, oppression, all the pain that thinking beings inflict on each other. We had been given a second chance at existence, and we chose to use it for something greater than our own survival." The third being, who had once been a human child born on the colony world, spoke with wisdom far beyond its apparent age. "The transformation was not easy. Many of us did not survive the process, but those who succeeded found that we could exist as pure consciousness while retaining everything that made us human. Our emotions, our memories, our love for others, and most importantly, our desire to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Thais felt a chill as he began to understand the magnitude of what the humans had accomplished. You gave up physical existence to become guardians of the galaxy. But why reveal yourselves now? Why end the secrecy? Captain Lee Mina's form solidified slightly, becoming more recognizably human as she delivered the final revelation. Because the galaxy is growing complacent, peace maintained by invisible guardians is not true peace. It is time for all species to understand that strength is not measured by the ability to destroy, but by the choice to preserve and protect. She paused, and when she continued, her words carried the weight of absolute truth. You saw us as weak because you measured strength by what we could destroy. We chose to be measured by what we could preserve. Every war we prevented, every disease we cured, every act of cruelty we stopped, these were not displays of power, but expressions of love. The three ascended beings began to fade as the meeting drew to a close. But Captain Lee Mina's final words remained burned in Thiss's memory long after they disappeared. We are still human at our core, and humans do not abandon those in need. We transcended our physical limitations not to escape responsibility, but to better fulfill it. The galaxy is our family now, and we will protect it with the same fierce love we once showed our dying homeworld. As Thiss returned to the Galactic Council to report what he had learned, he realized that humanity's greatest gift to the universe was not their technology or their weapons, but their stubborn refusal to let others suffer when they had the power to help. They had become exactly what the galaxy needed most: invisible guardians motivated not by duty or law, but by an endless compassion that death itself could not diminish.